Alrighty, welcome everyone. We're just gonna have everyone file in. I'll have a short introduction. We'll get started. Just give it a minute. If we had the Jeopardy tone, we would play it right through. Alrighty. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. We'll get started. I'm Gracie, I'm the events coordinator for print. A few housekeeping details just before we start. If you have any questions during the event, please feel free to enter them in the chat box, which is at the bottom right of your screen. And there is also a question and answer function, which is on the bottom bar of your screen, so you can enter them there as well. If you'd like a copy of We Call Them Beautiful, I'll include the link to the print page in the chat box. And if you're not local to Maine and you're just tuning in, you can still support print directly by purchasing from Diode Editions, who's the publisher. I'll include that link as well. And print will still earn 40% of the retail price of all poetry books sold, including one tonight. And if you just use the code PRINT at checkout, we'll put it right through. So now for our speakers. Abeer Hoque is a Nigerian-born Bangladeshi-American writer and photographer. Her books include a travel photography and poetry monograph, a linked collection of stories, poems, and photographs, and a memoir, all of which. KC Trommer is the author of the debut poetry collection, We Call Them Beautiful, and the chapbook, The Hasp Tongue. She is the founder of the collaborative audio project Queensbound, featured right there, and is the assistant director of communications at NYU Gallatin. She lives in Jackson Heights, Queens with her son. So please join me in virtually welcoming Abeer Hoque and KC Trommer.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks, Gracie. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in from wherever you are. I'm told we have a nice virtual room, so I'm glad to be with you. And thanks so much to Gracie and Print for hosting this. This reading was initially supposed to be happening on Congress Street in Portland in their beautiful space. And I'm glad that we could figure out another way to have it happen. And I'm so glad that Abeer could join me. And I am transmitting from a friend's house with a friend who has a beautiful stove in Bangor, Maine. And Abeer is here from, transmitting from Jackson Heights. So thanks for joining me, Abeer.
Of course, holding down the fort for you until you come back, but I'm jealous of where you are in Maine.
It's nice. Yeah, it's beautiful and nice. And I was, I've been visiting friends and like finding secret swimming spots, and it's been nice. I mean, my son last night, Sam, was saying that he misses New York, and then he's like, but I like it here and I like New York. And I was like, that's the city mouse, country mouse problem.
Yeah.
Loving them both. Yeah.
Should we talk about how we met? Or
Yeah. So so when we were talking with Mira, I think I forgot, because it feels like I've just known you for a long time, but I haven't actually known you for that long. Yeah.
Well, I very clearly remember the Maria Hadessa, who's a wonderful, well, she was Queens-based. She might still call herself Queens-based, poet who is now doing a PhD up at Brown. And she was doing a poetry workshop at Jackson Heights Library, which we both decided to attend. And it was wonderful. And afterwards, Mira, who's another writer based in Jackson Heights, introduced us. And we actually ended up forming a writing group at that time.
Yeah.
Or around that time, right? Wasn't that?
Yeah. Shortly thereafter. Yeah, and Mira was kind of like, how do you not know each other, which was nice. So that's when you know you've got like a friend in line, which is good. Yeah. And now we work on Queensbound together with Abeer's on the ed board of the Queensbound project, which is an ongoing poetry project which tries to bring poems and poets from throughout Queens. And Abeer is a contributor, and she did she was on our inaugural train reading in 2018 when we did the launch of the site. And yeah, like, and was just like a beautiful force for that project too, and is kind of continuing. So yeah.
I don't know if you want to talk about that now, but I would love to have you explain a little bit more how Queensbound came about, but maybe we can leave that for later.
Sure,
and,
sure.
Maybe you can tell us why you're in Maine.
Yeah, so I'm not just in Maine because I could come up here. I'm very grateful that I could, but I came up, this is my hometown of Bangor, Maine, and I don't spend a lot of time here for a whole host of reasons, but I'm glad to be back. And I had a friend who said, why don't you work remotely from here if you're working remotely? And I was like, well, this might be, you know, we don't know what the future's going to be like, but this might be a rare opportunity to do that. And my son was on vacation with his dad. And then I had a vacation booked for us that was kind of a working vacation where Queen's Council on the Arts gave me a small grant to do a Acadia cycle of poems. So, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk with you, Abeer, about tonight, because I'm up here. The idea was that I would come and have, like, in the perfect world that I imagined, my son would be in camp during the day, in a day camp on Acadia on Mount Desert Island, which is this beautiful, incredible island that is host to a national park. And then I was planning on doing a series of interviews and writing days while my son was in camp. And then I still had the money for the project, and the pandemic is upon us. So his camp was canceled, and now I'm just kind of doing preliminary interviews for this project, which is interviewing scientists about their work on the island and creating, in the spirit of Queensbound, in the sense of creating place-based work, creating place-based poems based on the conversations that I have with various scientists who work and study on the island. And I know you went to Scotland and did that. Maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of inspiring poems from science. I think there's such a beautiful and rich history of that. And also just, I feel like you can throw poets into pretty much anything, and you're going to get something interesting and often beautiful. And the fact that it is in Maine itself, which is like just also just as a geography is such a beautiful storied kind of place. Acadia National Park is like, it's a place I've always wanted to go. I've seen pictures.
Oh yeah. You gotta come. It's a magical place, and it's 45 minutes south of Bangor. You just take a road straight down, and right now there's tourists, but it's not at the level of summer tourism, and it's just full of stories and full of beautiful places, even when it's full of people. So we've got to get you here. That's true. And so I guess maybe I should read a poem I was thinking I should read a mapping poem, because that's in the spirit of everything. So I thought I'd read First Map, which is the opening. Yeah, so that's the opening poem in this collection. And it kind of has some of the things that we'll talk about today, which is like art, poetry, mapping, the trouble between boys and girls. Storytelling stuff. So it's called First Map. Stone fences lined the road to the art academy, where the teacher unscrolled the butcher paper and told me to where the teacher unscrolled the butcher paper on the floor, told me to lie down. I fanned my fingers and spread my legs as a boy drew my outline in marker. The ceiling was so far up, the cement floor cold against my back, and the smell of the room was the smell of drying acrylic. I stood up from the paper, and my body was an outline inside the sneaker prints of the boy who had drawn me. The teacher handed me a pen, said, "Now fill in the rest."
I love that last line. It gets me every time.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, that was in Connecticut, the other place that I grew up in. But
yeah. So I know you mentioned the Scotland program. I did this program last summer, which was incredible. It was called the Diverse Intelligences Summer Institute, where they brought together all these people thinking about the mind and intelligence, looking at that from all different, like from, animal behavior people, from like psychologists, from like artificial intelligence. And then they also brought in storytellers who are artists of any kind, to come in and also just talk about stories and how these concepts come together. And I found it to be just overwhelming, but so invigorating to kind of be launched and like absorbed by a highly technical discussion of a field where I had some entry to it, but it didn't matter in a way because I was just taking from it what I needed. And I would love to know how you see your work, like the interviews with the scientists, like what you're hoping to get out of it with the.
Yeah. So I did a preliminary interview. So I went down to Acadia on Monday, and I talked with the director of the Acadia Oceanic Institute and her co-directors. And so I talked with her and them, and two of them are geologists. So we had this conversation about deep time and thinking about the rocks coming together as being like a kind of slow symphony coming together. And the reason, aside from wanting to move a bit away from narrative poetry or just more confessional poetry, I actually wanted to think about how scientists look at the world and how poets look at the world with, I would argue, a similar sense of wonder, though scientists are using more precise technical approaches to understanding, and poets are using equally precise technical terms, but that apply more to emotion and to description. So I was thinking, well, in these conversations, in that same spirit of what you're saying, like, what can I find from what I'm hearing, and like what's my lens on what the what's my auditory lens on what they're telling me. So I had this discussion with them just about sites on the island where they take students when they're studying in the summer, and what sites they return to, not just for study, but as sites on the island for contemplation. So I'm kind of extending the project to think that I would come back next summer when, who knows where we will be, but perhaps things will be different. And I can go with them on trips. So it's really, actually, I have a kind of open, it's kind of an open invitation, which I hope doesn't seem too loosey-goosey for the scientists I'm talking to, but really I want to understand the island from different scientific vantage points, and then to see if I can write poems. I'd like to do some sound recordings of our conversations and then take those interviews and distill them. And then I'm thinking about recording the poems and embedding them on a map of the island as a kind of an auditory tour of the island, which is kind of like Queen's Bound, but in a different iteration. Yeah. And I'm interested always in the same way, like I grew up with my brother and my sister and my mother are all artists, and in that same way I'm interested in where, not only where science and poetry meet, but where art and poetry meet. And I feel like we can borrow these languages and understandings to kind of just shift our approach. As a poet, it helps me shift my approach to writing about something and to looking closely. It
reminds me, I work with this geologist. I'm also a geologist's daughter, and I find the language, the vocabulary of geology to be so compelling. And there's this one scale that I have been obsessed with for a long time, and the geologist I work with is in California, so earthquakes are a big deal. So there's a scale that measures the stability of the earth, and it goes from unconditionally stable unconditionally unstable, and I don't even know what that means, right? Like, and so I mapped it to like an emotional plane, right? Obviously, because that's what poets do. But I love like all the pieces of the puzzle you get from like
unconditionally unstable is right where we are right now.
Right, exactly. Maybe that's that was, I needed to live to 2020 to understand what the other end of this scale was going to look like. I would love to know, just because I have never written a collection of poetry, what it was like putting together your first collection of poetry.
I'm really happy that it's with the publisher it's with, and they did a beautiful job, Dio did, making it into a book that I'm just so happy to hold in my hands. And thank you, Vanna White. But like the first poem the first poem I had published is actually the poem I kind of joke, it's the poem I should have just stopped and written just this one poem, and it was published in 2007. It's The Cyclone, and then it's had a really long and beautiful life, this poem, where my friend Herschel Garfine, who's an amazing composer, picked it up and turned it into a song for soprano, piano, and cello. And then he's done a song cycle. And people, no matter what I read, if I read that poem, people are like, I really liked what you read. I really liked that poem.
Right.
And that was 2007. And this just came out last year. And in the world of poetry, and a lot of non-poets don't know this, but a lot of poets know this, and I think you know, but like you have to win a prize. Generally speaking, you have to win a prize. And so it was a finalist 25 times. So it just kept being a bridesmaid eternally and then not happening. And then it got caught up with this predatory, and I wrote about it. It's not even worth talking about, except that it was kind of mind-boggling. This predatory press in England, and I wrote about it for VitaWeb, about the press, and that also has its own kind of long history. And then I finally was able, after much wrangling, to get my rights back, and Diode happily picked it up. So it's alive, like it exists in the world, and I'm really, really happy. And I think that my first poetry teacher, Bill Carpenter, who used to be, he just retired from the College of the Atlantic on Acadia, is tuning in. So hi, Bill, if you're there. I know several people are happy to know that you might be tuning in. A beautiful poet in person. And yeah, so it's had this long life. I've been writing poetry since I was 14, and this came out, last year. So it was a long time in the works. And I, quietly working on other things, but this one I just kept trying to like get it to go out the door. So maybe, should I read I'll read the title poem, is that?
I would love for you to read, that poem. Or the most popular one, you mean?
Oh, I can read that, yeah. I'll read the most popular poem, which now I've set the expectations too high for.
Right.
So this poem, this poem's, Herschel found this poem because he was commissioned to write a song about Brooklyn, and so this is about the Coney Island cyclone. The cyclone. I don't understand you the way I don't understand roller coasters, why people lock themselves into rickety rides to be reminded repeatedly they are going to die, little deaths. The personality book asked me what I felt when I imagined riding a roller coaster. Dread, I thought, and the next page said the roller coaster represents sex. And I felt the dip in my stomach I knew before I knew roller coasters, and I wanted to tell the book about my roaring 20s, how I went bravely over the clattering tracks, locked in, white-knuckled, screaming, rounding the same corners to feel I was alive, and sex mine to ride. How much of our bodies are water, the nerves a net of Christmas lights thrown over us. On Coney Island, the screams of the cyclone riders whip around like streamers. I want to point them out to you, ask if you recognize them, or if there is a girl up there in a striped shirt, tilting back, eyes closed, laughing her head off.
Amazing.
Thanks. That was a poem when I was like, I should try to write a poem about joy. And I don't know that I did, but I was like, I tried to write toward the non-obvious place.
I mean, that first line, I made a whole bunch of notes, and that's one of the lines. The first, I love you like the way I love roller coasters. Is that what it is? Oh my God.
I don't understand you the way I don't understand roller coasters.
Yeah.
And apparently, according to the personality book, also sex. Hi, Herschel. Oh, hi, Herschel. Thanks. Oh, people are chatting. That's nice.
I also have to say that Herschel just wrote a comment, and if my poetry teacher wrote that comment, I would be so proud of myself.
It's so nice to see people. Thank you for saying nice things, everyone. Thank you for being here. And I don't know if I thanked you properly for being my interlocutor of year, but you are my wonderful interlocutor. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to. Would you want to? I mean, I'm always obsessed with ekphrastic. Poems.
Yeah. Do you want to read one?
So I've often combined poetry and photography and written poems inspired by photography or images. And I know you have also a long history of doing that as well. And there's a whole section in your book that's, poems that have like allusions to or are inspired by different artworks. I think there's so much richness that we can get from those intersections.
I agree, yeah.
My way of thinking about it is just that, our lives are so complex that actually combining and inspiring each, between these are a way to come closer to the reality that we live in. But I would love to know what you think about how ekphrastics works in your work.
Yeah, I was thinking when I started writing ekphrastic, first of all, like for the non-poets, they're poems that describe works of art in some way, and like the straight ahead definition is that it's a descriptive poem that tries to render in words something that's visual. And I just started thinking, so I have a family of artists. My brother, my mother, my sister made stained glass art, or she made stained glass art. My brother's a photographer and painter, and my mom was also a painter. And so I grew up in this, and my now sadly former brother-in-law was a sculptor. So I grew up in this kind of conversation about art, or like people who thought visually, and I grew up like loving art and thinking about it. And I started thinking, well, what if I started writing poems about the pieces of artwork that I can't shake, you know? And I just finished a long poem, if anybody knows how to place a long poem, about Louise Bourgeois. It's a sequence of poems that have to deal with her sculptures. And I was like, there's something, I thought I would write these poems, again, trying to get away from myself, and you can never get away from yourself. I thought I'll write some ekphrastic poems where I write about why these pieces of artwork are compelling to me. And then, of course, I came crashing up against myself in the process of just trying to account for why they were important. So yeah, so I also, it's a way to be very like really, oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
It's a way to be very, if you have to be descriptive, you can't not be descriptive. And so if you're tending to write, you're trying to write these more generic lines, it's not going to be possible. You're going to have to ground them in some kind of descriptive quality. So,
yeah. I think one of my favorite poems from your book is a book that I think brings together both a kind of a technical literacy as well as talking about art, which is that poem, The Light Table. I wonder if you might read that for...
I can read that one. Yeah, that's about my sister, my beautiful, incredibly talented sister, who I don't think is making stained glass anymore, but I grew up with her making stained glass all the time, and watching her. She's 12 years older than me. I just, would watch my brother and sister, and in awe and love.
What I love about this poem is it's a poem about process, which I think it's so lovely to read about process.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Thank you. Yeah. So this is for her. The Light Table. She places the glass on top of the vellum, puts down a stand of trees. Around her, textured, beveled, clotted, I hear the arch ache of glass against glass. The sheets lean against each other under her. Her knees are bracketed by a clear pane, a sheet of green. One, for the birches, is cataract white. Pressing through the base of her thumbs, she funnels her full weight down to the tip of the glass cutter. She stops, knocks a tree limb from the sheet. She lays the puzzle of it piece by piece on the light table, spreads liquid flux over the glass. Copper tape glints around the edges. With the soldering iron, she glides the silver solder over the edges, fusing the birches in a net of light, each one bound to the one beside it. Smoke drifts up, and it looks as if her hair is beginning to catch fire. I've never read that one, actually. I've never read that one ever. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, no, I love that one.
That's for Kelly. Yeah.
I would love to, if you want to read another poem that's inspired by art.
Yeah.
One of your,
just read one.
I can pick one, but
no, that's fine.
Might,
I mean, I often read. Let's see. I'm trying to think of one that's like, I really like this poem Bench, which is about the Noguchi Museum. So it's both a Queen's poem and an ekphrastic poem. And for anyone who hasn't been to Queens, thanks, Bobby. It's a really incredibly beautiful museum, probably closed right now. But when I went there, well, I'll read the poem, but then I have an addendum to the poem. It's called Bench, 1999. All the scenes I remember of us are interiors, except the summer day when we went to the Noguchi. Before the archway in the sculpture garden, I started to sit down on a bench, and you gathered my right arm gently in your hand, pulling me up and saying, while pointing at the sign that says, please do not touch. Next to it, the museum label read, Bench, 1966, and I laughed, and you said, that is the difference between you and me, right there. Oh, but Noguchi would have wanted me to sit on Bench, and for that matter, to touch every one of his sculptures, those smooth stones and soft polished wood that seemed to call for hands. You are right, of course. If it looks like a bench and I am tired after walking, I will sit. I will not be careful. I will not read the fine print. I will take it at its word. I will trust that it will hold me for as long as I need to be held. And so that poem, thanks for asking, because that poem I ended up connecting through a Queen's Council on the Arts event, actually a panelist judging panel for one of their sessions. And there's a woman who works in the Noguchi, and she knew that poem. I was like, I have a poem about the Noguchi, and the next day she read the poem, and I sent it to her, and she was like, guess what? You can sit on bench now. And I felt completely vindicated. I was like, that's great.
That's great. Yeah. Wow. I wonder when that happened and how.
Yeah, it would be good to know, right? So that's like Queens and Noguchi and ekphrasis together. Yeah. Thanks for asking.
Okay. I found one of the, just really compelling parts of your work in this book anyway is there's like a thread of danger or maybe even violence that runs through even some of the most mundane kind of moments or situations.
There's a lot of menace and emergency happening.
Menace, yeah, exactly. It's a great way. Yeah, that's a good description. But
fragility. David Carr says, "Hi, David."
Yeah, fragility. Yeah, and I love that because it kind of points to all these underlying things that happen between people. And anyway, I would love to know if you would want to read a poem or talk more about some of those themes.
Yeah, I was thinking, I have a poem that's a kind of a poem that's set, I have two that might be good. The poem Up, or maybe If You're Not Married. Do you have a preference for either of those?
I liked both of them.
Maybe I'll read Up, which is, I know this is kind of also a family poem, and it's about motherhood. And I think probably I'm just like an anxious person, so I'm always vigilant and attentive, and that's probably where that's coming through in the poems. But this one I wrote when my son was 2, and now he's 9 and like rolling his eyes and wants me to play Minecraft with him. But oh, thanks, Heather. That's my best friend from high school, Heather Day. Hello, Heather. Very fine poet. So this poem's called Up. So often I think of everything I cannot tell you, everything that will not translate across time. If there is a camera, let it catch us, so that you may see something of this story that you are in when you are outside of it. Let whatever it catches show you how you were loved, a still of you, pulled up into my lap, laughing. In raising you, I track back. Over my shoulder, I see the whole country behind me as I beat out a new path. My mother tells me about after they've been taken away, how her mother came to the schoolyard fence and Aunt Jan stopped short, said, "Better not, there'll be trouble." My grandmother, looking at the backs of her girls receding, her heart walking out of her chest. And now all the time mine's broken and mended, broken and mended. I do not understand. But know this, everything that I want is for you alone. Bring me back with a kiss, my sweet boy. There is this love, no other. What stunned me was to learn that to love you, I had to ask for better and then make it, and then better what I had bettered. This doesn't stop. I pull you up because you asked me up, and up, 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 I will pull you. I now think of that as being a very American poem where we always think we have to do better and better. I don't know if it's necessary, but maybe, motherhood, you're always trying to maybe do better than what you had, however good it was or however it was.
Yeah, but I think it works on not just for mothers, but this idea that if you want something better for someone, you actually have to ask for more for yourself in a way, right? Like
I was just having a conversation about a friend who I was like, you have to love yourself enough. You have to love, and as a friend to somebody who's in crisis, or they have to love themselves enough to get themselves out of a crisis too, or into a new story. You have to love yourself into a new story. And I think motherhood is this kind of awakening to this idea, like, oh, you've got the story that you lived, and then you do have all of that baggage all of those things hanging on you, and yet you can decide, like, I'd like it to go a little differently at least, or to make efforts that way. And, you know, you do that for anybody you love, if it's your child or anybody else in your life. Yeah.
Or even just for yourself.
Or especially for yourself, so that you can be somebody who can love. Right.
Right. Yeah, who can send that out into the world.
Yeah.
I also, you know, on a kind of a different tack, but in the same lines, I find there's also just a thread of humor in, and of course that makes sense because you yourself are such a witty and funny person.
Thank you. You always say I'm witty. You're so sweet.
I'm always laughing when we're chatting. But there's, like, for example, there's a poem that's all from the point of view of a match, which itself, the poem is not actually that, you know, funny, but I find that, you know, that just sort of, it's in an interesting perspective to take, and I find that to be kind of a joyful thing. But you have other poems that are also just funny, especially when they're read out loud. Like,
you want me to read your underwear?
The underwear poem is good.
I'll read your underwear, which is always a little bit less intense than the other ones. And I should try to maybe not try too hard, but I should maybe put some more funny in the poems without trying too hard. Yeah, so this one is called Your Underwear. Since we broke up, I found a pair of your underwear in my hamper. I washed them. It feels strange to have them, but you didn't leave anything else, and I'm not about to call you up and ask you to come get them. I want to get rid of them, but part of me still thinks it's wrong to throw away such perfectly nice underwear. Since they're underwear, I can't even donate them. I put them on once. They're clean. But when I did, I felt like a cross-dresser. They upset me, your underwear. I can't solve all their problems. They keep showing up in the laundry. They're like somebody else's kid from down the block who has big lonely eyes and who always turns up around supper time. So, you know, but that's probably a poem for my Aunt Jan, really, because my Aunt Jan was always, she would be like, they're perfectly nice under. It's like my Aunt Jan voice in my head. My wonderful late Aunt Jan. That's totally probably her showing up. I can't solve all their problems exactly.
Yeah, I feel like you can for the underwear anyway.
Only
right?
for the underwear, not for the occupant.
In a very particular context, we could solve all the problems. I would love to just talk a little bit more about Queensbound, which I think, when I met you, that's when you were embarking on, like, creating Queensbound, right?
Yeah.
I think it's such an amazing project, and there should be Queensbounds all over the country in their own bound, self-bound, whatever.
Yeah, there was a Brooklyn poet that was like Brooklyn. Oh, Patricia Spears Jones was like, Brooklyn's getting jealous, and I was like, that's the idea.
Yeah.
Because for non-New Yorkers, you will not be surprised to hear that Brooklyn, you know, lords itself over Queens as being superior and more interesting, more hip. It's not true. It's not true. But anyway, so Queensbound, I was a long time ago, was a finalist to be the Queen's Poet Laureate, and they said, how can you come up with a project that would bring everybody together? And I was like, that's such a good question. Like, what's a unifying thing? And I was like, and I had been thinking, can we get an informal directory of Queens poets going? Because I knew poets, and then I knew poets who knew poets, and yet there was no workable at that time. It's changed considerably, because that was already, I was thinking about that like 5 or 6 years ago. It's changed dramatically in the past couple of years. And I was like, how can we know each other? Because poets, I mean, we make no money. We love poetry. We just toil away for the smallest piece of the smallest pie. And like, the least we could do is have community with each other and know each other's work. So I was like, well, the subway is a map, and it goes to all the parts, not every part, but to many of them, not to Maspeth, for example. But I was like, well, we could use that as a principle. And then I was like, well, what if we just had it be an audio project? And, you know, the kind of bigger vision is that we get a poem for every station stop in Queens. And right now, as you know, we just launched the website where we've got, I think, 33 poems embedded from 33 different poets. And the idea is that we finally we stop the project, like the proper realization of the project, when we get all the station stops associated with a poem. And then I've been thinking, as you know, about other ways that we can bring in other voices and other languages and other projects, and maybe see if we can expand it, make other places jealous, and then have them do this. And our idea was that we'd have a train reading every year, and obviously that didn't happen this year. So this year, instead of doing the train reading, which would have just been a frightful hazard. We just launched the site instead. So if anybody isn't familiar with it, the site's queensbound.com. And we had a really amazing web designer do a beautiful design where the audio is embedded, and we had new contributors and everything. And maybe because I think my friend Jeremy's mom is here. Hi, Lisa, if you're here. Maybe I can read the poem that I read, The Odds of It. So I'm in Maine, and this is a poem about my now late friend, unfortunately late friend, Jeremy Schneider, who died on August 10th. Ugh. And I miss him all the time. And I read this poem. He lived in Queens, he lived in Maine, he grew up in Appleton, which is Camden area. And then he lived in Queens for a long time and was in Astoria when he died, much too young. And so I read this as the kind of opening poem, and it's like a secret poem on the website. I don't know if you know this, right, Abeer? This poem is on the website, but like not official.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It was, maybe Lexi didn't move it into the new migration, but it's secretly there. So it's called The Odds of It for HJS. I feel a sour American want in me rising on the 7 train as the car comes up for air after Hunter's Point. So I start to play that ridiculous little thought game that seems to settle all scores. What would I do if I won the lottery? After I send half of it away to Uncle Sam, and I finish buying everyone houses who needs houses, and after I donate like a Coke, but to the places that would undo their work, because it's that much, and fantasy doesn't care about reason. And just as I bank the rest, I think of H, who isn't anymore, but who is all the time showing up inside me, called to mind by someone's casual mention of a restaurant in Astoria that he and I talked about going to, but which we will never. Because he isn't anymore, this lovely dark boy who became a man worth knowing, one who carried so much of my history, this person I lost and found and lost again. The fucking injustice of it, of the finding and losing, of his being gone, never goes away. I'm about to step onto the platform at Court Square, some part of me still thinking, what if I had more? Because I want to be able to stay in this place that keeps turning into gold around me. Because I must stay here, and I don't know how to manage it. And it seems, in that old American way, that I'm not enough, I don't have enough, and I never will. That only money makes things possible. And the sky is tilting away from me into darkness, and I think of H, who isn't anymore, who is all the time. And I think, don't be a fool. You've already won the lottery. You're alive. Yeah, so, yeah, thinking about him driving around to his old haunts, which is funny. And I talked to his mom today. I'm gonna see her sometime this week, which is nice. And that, yeah, that's kind of a Queens and Maine and Queens poem. Yeah, I'm trying always to bring these kind of impossible things together too. So.
That's, I think, the poet's job, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What's that line that you have?
This is the poet's business.
Business, yeah, to ask better questions or to answer them or find the answers in different ways. I love that. I also wrote that line down somewhere. So.
Oh, thanks. Hi, Gracie's back.
Oh,
I'm
hi.
back. Meeting you here. I have a few audience questions for both of you if you're interested, if we're ready.
Sure.
Great.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about the intersection of art and poetry, different forms of art. Do you have any creative hobbies outside of writing that you find help your writing? I know that some authors knit or cook or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, Abeer can say this as well. I make art, but I'm not. I have a full-time job. I have a small human, and so I write poetry, and I also have Queensbound, so I have a lot of commitments, and so I make art, but I kind of make it occasionally and quietly. I mean, if I won the lottery, I'd just like set up shop and make art and like bring everybody into a big house and we'd all make art together. And then Abeer does all kinds of wonderful stuff as well.
Yeah, I take photographs because I'm actually shit at actually making visual art, but I really appreciate it. But in terms of things that make me, that help me make to write, I feel like all the usual things. Actually, being in nature is really inspiring. Getting enough sleep is really inspiring.
Abeer is like go, go, go. That's, yes.
Well, that's because I get like my 8 hours of sleep, like really deep, restful sleep. And then, yeah, after that, I'm a bit of a pep monster.
Alrighty. Who are you reading now, and who do you read for inspiration?
Well, I just taught a class where I was rereading a bunch of people I love, and I can say like a book that I love, and it's stranded in my office that I read and really adored and think about often is Javier Zamora's Unaccompanied. I don't know if you've read that, Abeer, people. Beautiful collection about crossing the U.S.-Mexico border and all the travails of it, told in a really moving, compelling way that feels important for now. And then I was rereading Gwendolyn Brooks, who's just like, forget it. She's just, why? All the terrible stories, not all the, it's called The Terrible Stories. That collection is just wonderfully economical and eviscerating. And she's just so smart and amazing. Those are the two that I have been returning to. And then I was teaching, so I was kind of going over people I love. And for Maine Poets, I actually was in a bookshop with my friend Eric, and we found one of Bill's books, Speaking Fire at Stones, and he's my first teacher, and I love him. And so if there are non-Mainers here who haven't read him, you should pick him up. Yeah. What about you, Abeer? Who are you reading?
I'm reading my new pandemic goal was to read a poetry book a month. So I started it because I was spending too much time doom scrolling on my phone. So I put a poetry book over my phone. So every time I had to pick up my phone, I had to read a poem or two. So I've gone through like 5 books now, which I'm so proud of myself. But the one I'm reading right now is The Tradition by Jericho Brown, which is wonderful. He's invented this new form called the duplex, and it sort of combines blues and ghazals and something else, I can't remember, like 3 different forms. And it has, I mean, I love rhythm and rhyme in poetry, so it has all of that and repetition as well. And it's just this beautiful kind of like circling back on itself thing. And the other book I'm reading actually is written by poet KC Trommer, but it's a book of essays called Minor Feelings. And I was actually thinking about something you just said, KC. She comes to poetry later in the game. She comes, she starts college, she thinks she's going to study art. And when she finally turns to poetry, she actually talks about it as a way of actually realizing the art she couldn't actually physically create.
Yeah, using different tools.
I'm a perfectionist or like anxious, and I could not get the art the way I wanted to, but I could write about it.
Get the words right. Yeah, that makes sense.
I was thinking, oh, that's such a interesting and wonderful kind of turn.
Yeah.
All right, we have an audience question. What would be the title or subject of a poem written by you today?
I just wrote a poem, and I was all proud of it, and I was all in love with it. And the title, the way that you're in love with something when you first read it, what was it called? Oh, I can't remember. I'm thinking about writing a story that's not a poem, so it's not entering the poem piece, about the quarry, the Franklin Quarry, which is a dark and strange place up here. Might even give a drive-by, not swim in it. Write something about it. I've just been really inspired by thinking about place and memory and how they overlap. So I have a short story that I started called Wishing Well that's about that, which I may never finish. What about you, Abeer? What are you working on?
As I think we talked about this, I wrote a poem that was so bad, I was like, it might cancel out every other good poem I've ever written.
Yeah, no, that's not how it works.
Thank God that, that's not how it works. I just wrote a short story, and I haven't written a short story in years, but I did it because a friend of mine is compiling an anthology for Bangladesh's 50th anniversary next year, and so she wanted a story that had to do with Bangladesh. And because I'm not living there anymore, I wrote a story about Bangladeshis in Queens, set during the pandemic. So I've been sort of a quasi-translator for one of our assembly people here, calling people who need help for food insecurity or whatever else, kind of like make sure they get the help they need. So I've heard from and talked to a bunch of people. So I've sort of conflated a bunch of those stories along with just my own experience of what it was like to, my own quite privileged experience living in Queens, because I'm not experiencing any of the kinds of insecurities that so many people are. But to like kind of, yeah, tell us one story of the pandemic. So, and it's called—
Yeah, I feel like I should, we didn't get to this, which is totally fine, but I did write a poem about, because we haven't talked about, because I'm in this fantasy world of Maine in which the pandemic, I was able to step outside of Queens for a little bit after being intensely locked in. And I wanted to read this poem, Epicenter, that I wrote that people seem to like.
Right,
I'm not,
yeah.
but maybe I'll put it in the chat. Does that help? Or
yeah, and the other thing that you can put in the chat is the Onassis project that we did. So we got they helped do this through the Queens Museum. They asked, so what we ended up doing was doing, what's it called? Exquisite Corpse, using with was it 7 poets? Or 9 poets?
I think it ended up being, so I should know because I organized it. I don't remember. But we did, we did 7 lines for the 7 train, and we did it as an exquisite corpse, and then I did the Google form where we blacked out everything except the last line. So and then everybody, go ahead. So
you could see the line right before and then like add in your own 7 lines. And so it becomes this kind of lovely group, a collaboration between all these Queens poets. And so, yeah, that's definitely I would love for more people to see that and for us to do that again, because it was a really amazing experience.
Yeah, we did video, everybody did a video, they wrote, and then we did videos, and then we got the videos edited together, and then they put it on the Onassis site, which was really cool. And it was like 7 lines. It was like low stakes, because I felt bad asking anybody to write something, but you know,
but
7 lines.
Perfect, right? Because people can do it.
Yeah.
Alrighty, I think this will be our final question, just keeping an eye on time. You've been writing poems since 14. What drew you to it at first, and how have your ideas about poetry changed?
Oh, well, and there's been no movement at all. No, there's just been like an expansion. I mean, as I said, like I grew up with all of these artists around, and they were all, I mean, my mom is obviously older, my brother and sister are older, and I would love to have made art, but I think I felt intimidated, and then so I ended up being the communicator, and so that was a kind of art that I could make. And then, just, moody 80s gothness just drew me to, and I was thinking actually the Spoon River Anthology is one of my favorite books, like first books, and then sex, all the usual, like, angsty white girl kind of New Englandy angsty white girl things. But it was really just a way to kind of, I grew up with a lot of emotional difficulty, and it was a way to like look at trauma through somebody else's life, and to understand the world in a kind of tiny little space for sense making about the world, right? You can do it on a page and be in charge of something. So I think I've always loved that kind of tidiness. There's a Haga Shahid Ali line that's I've always loved neatness, from his poem Postcard from Kashmir, and something about that like desire to like contain and tidy is probably from having kind of rangy life and feelings.
Yeah, I love that. I think that there's something really beautiful about the fact that poetry can be a way to process, a way to be your own therapist, but then also be a form of art.
Yeah, and and my friend Douglas, Martin, who's a fantastic writer and poet and friend, I think he may be on here too. When I lived in Athens, Georgia for a time, he was like, I kind of stopped writing poetry, and he forced me to join the slam team, the Athens, Georgia slam team. So,
oh, nice.
If you like my poems or you don't like them, we'll give it to Douglas. Hi, Douglas. And and that was a way to think about. That made me think a lot more about how poems are sound acts, and wanting to pay attention not just to the tiny room, but also to the performance aspect of things. Yeah.
My favorite Agha Shahid Ali line is, "Your history gets in the way of my memory."
Ooh, that's not, yeah. Oh, he's so good.
Great.
That's so good.
Alrighty, well, I think that was our last question for now. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. You can always check the print website for both of these amazing artists' work. And thank you again for coming out tonight.
Thank you for having, and thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for hosting, Gracie. Thanks,
Hopefully we'll
Abeer.
have an event in the store sometime soon.
Maybe next summer. That would be nice.
That's the plan. All right. Night, everyone.
Good night.